name is Richard Harknett. I'm fortunate enough to be the chair and, or head of the Department of Political Science here at the University of Cincinnati. And I would switch back over, but my concern is then something will go wrong with the laptop, and I have it on display. So what I'm going to do is ask each of my colleagues as they come up to just give a quick introduction of themselves as they go into their perspective. Our objective tonight, there's been rallies, debates, all sorts of interesting takes on this. For somebody that studies international relations, international security, on the one hand, that's not a bad thing, that we actually have a public engaged in a serious international diplomatic public policy issue. Right? So, political scientist in me says that's a good thing, even if the rhetoric on both sides may be getting a little out of hand. So what we're going to try to do tonight is give you some perspectives on the agreement. Of course, when we originally set up the evening, we were not sure whether and thus the panel's original title, the agreement in balance, we didn't know whether or not the vote in Congress would go up or down. For those that are following the news, there are 42 now Democratic senators who have pledged to support the agreement. So that is not only a veto-proof segment of the Senate, but for those that know the arcane rules of the Senate, this prevents a quorum, or on the flip side, it allows for a Democratic filibuster so that the measure can't even be brought to the floor. There are other means and ways where those that wish to oppose the agreement on the political side may be able to do so down the road with regard to reimposition of sanctions. But again, if this coalition holds at the votes that President Obama has been able to assemble, we would be in the same place, right, from a domestic political standpoint. So setting aside whether the agreement's going to be voted on or not, what we're going to focus on is what are the implications of the agreement moving forward. And to start us off, I'm going to ask my colleague from political science, Dr. Dinshaw Mistry, to give us an overview of the agreement itself. So we may actually have to, right, we do have to. So Brendan, you should be able to hear us, but, and then we minimize it. Okay.
Okay, so what I'll do in about 5 minutes really is go over 3 main points. Where does Iran stand in the nuclear world order, in the non-proliferation regime, if you will? What attempts at nuclear diplomacy have taken place really in the last 10 years? And then what is this agreement all about? And to what extent does it put a brake on Iran's nuclear program? So in brief, the nuclear world order is really divided into 3 sets of countries, if you will, A, B, and C on the table there. About 50 countries actually have the technology to build nuclear reactors, and actually do have nuclear reactors. Out of those 50, about 15 have sensitive nuclear technology, which is uranium enrichment or plutonium reprocessing. And out of those 15, 9 actually have nuclear weapons. The dividing line between Category C and the others is that countries in Category C are outside the NPT, that's the Non-Proliferation Treaty inspection regime. This becomes clearer if you look at the nuclear fuel cycle that I have up here. So the 2 paths to a nuclear weapon are really uranium and plutonium. If you follow the arrows, uranium from mines, you spin it and refine it in centrifuges, and you get enriched uranium. If a country is in the NPT inspection regime, you're sure that you have inspectors watching over that this enriched uranium is going into a civilian reactor and is not going the other direction into a nuclear weapon. That's the first path to a nuclear weapon. The second path, of course, is plutonium. Again, if a country is in the NPT, you have inspectors watching over the reactor, and the plutonium really comes from the back end of a reactor. It's reprocessed, and you get a nuclear weapon from there. So bottom line is really if Iran is in the NPT, it should not be a problem in the sense that it will not have nuclear weapons. It's essentially that straightforward. The complication arises because it does have sensitive nuclear technology. It's in this category B here. So any day it wants to leave the NPT, it could use its sensitive technology to essentially build nuclear weapons. And this, of course, becomes a security threat to all countries in the region and everywhere in the world, in fact. And so this security threat, of course, brings about fears of a war. And this is essentially my starting point. Do we have an alternative to war in the sense of a diplomatic alternative to block Iran's path to a nuclear weapons? Now, European countries actually recognize this really in the wake of the Iraq war. The background is the Iraq war, and fears that there would be another war very soon if this problem was not addressed. So the chronology I have here, I'll just run through this very quickly. 2002, it was revealed that Iran had secretly built a few centrifuges really acquired from the international black market. Okay. And so in 2003, the three European countries got together and brokered a temporary suspension where Iran would not enrich uranium in those centrifuges. And that suspension lasted for about 2 years, till 2005. A new Iranian president was elected in 2005, and essentially Iran ended the suspension at the time and proceeded to build more centrifuges and start enriching uranium in those centrifuges. So it was essentially referred to the UN Security Council in 2006. And then you had a parallel track of diplomacy and sanctions to try to get it from stop enriching uranium. So the diplomatic proposals that the EU gave Iran were essentially no enrichment, dismantle your centrifuges, and in exchange you will get some incentives. The incentives were, of course, you'll get lifetime fuel guarantees for any reactor you have, so you don't really need that enriched uranium. And B, they'll support Iran's entry into the World Trade Organization. And the Bush administration actually agreed to support Iran's entry into the WTO also. Iran, of course, did not stop enriching at the time, and so we got 4 rounds of UN sanctions. The thrust of these sanctions were really an arms embargo. That was the critical part of these sanctions, which is countries are forbidden to sell heavy arms to Iran. Post-2010, really, additional sanctions began ratcheting up. And these essentially affected Iran's ability to access international banking. Anything it imports and exports has to go through international banking channels for the most part. Okay. And beyond that, they started targeting Iran's oil exports. So this is really post-2010. And of course, the background to this post-2010 is the Obama administration gave a single proposal in 2009. It did not actually ask Iran to stop enriching uranium, but it did say, whatever stock of enriched uranium you have, ship it out temporarily, and then we'll broker a deal later on. Iran stalled on that, and the Obama administration did not wait for more diplomacy. It basically started asking everybody else, reduce your oil purchases from Iran. And it implemented those banking sanctions. So that's essentially the diplomacy and sanctions. When a new Iranian president was elected, we got two agreements, if you will. So the November 2013 was the freeze for freeze agreement. Iran won't build more centrifuges, and the world won't impose more sanctions. And then in 2015, we've got this comprehensive agreement, which I'll show in a minute. It's important to kind of track over time the number of centrifuges that Iran built up. Really starting around 2007, and by 2013 you had almost 20,000 centrifuges, out of which 10,000 were actually operating and another 9,000 were not spinning uranium, but they are out there. Okay, and so this freeze in 2013 stopped new centrifuges from being installed. And under this 2015 agreement, the number will go down to 6,000. So this is my last slide. What's the 2015 agreement all about? Really, again, if you look at this nuclear fuel cycle, the agreement blocks three critical parts of the fuel cycle. So one is the number of centrifuges, cut down from the 19,000 that it has to 6,000 being allowed to operate. The rest are put in storage. It's important to know this is not permanent. It's for 10 to 15 years, and I can talk about that in the questions. The second is the stock of enriched uranium that it had, about 12 tons. Typically takes 1 ton per bomb. Okay, it's going to be cut down, everybody says, by 95 to 98%, which is basically down to 300 kilograms. So the stock of enriched uranium that could go into a nuclear weapon is drastically reduced. There is a heavy water reactor out there that is this alternative pathway to a bomb, and that's going to be reconfigured so it will not produce plutonium. And finally, the inspection regime around Iran will become much stronger. Okay, so the sum of all these 4 bullet points is that if Iran ever leaves the NPT and wants to quickly build nuclear weapons from either enriched uranium or plutonium, it's going to take much more than a year to do that if it ever breaks out. And really, this is where we stand right now with the agreement. Okay, so I'll stop there and answer any technical questions in the Q&A.
So we're going to just take a 30 seconds here and see if we can get